Alright, in this video I'm going to give you a very brief and basic overview of the GUI for Vocal Synth 2. This is it, as you can see, and it is beautiful. iZotope don't mess around with the GUIs these days. From left to right, top to bottom, we got the ability to rename the Vocal Synth instance. And Vocal Synth is also compatible with Neutron 2's visual mixer. So that's going to be very helpful. And it's also compatible with the masking feature inside of Neutron 2. So if you have Neutron 2, that's something to think about. The compatibility is there. I suggest you use it. Next, we've got the mode selection, where we can go between auto, MIDI, and sidechain mode. Auto mode is just the basic mode where you have it on your vocal channel and it affects the vocal on that channel. The other two modes will be explained in future videos, so look out for those. Next we have the preset window, and here we have auto mode presets and MIDI mode presets. However, you can mix and match these. You don't need to worry about whether or not you're in MIDI mode to use these MIDI mode presets. As you can see, I'm in auto mode and it did change all of the parameters. It just means that these presets were made with incoming MIDI signals in mind. I'm going to jump out of there. We can browse through. Once we click one, we could just click to the left or the right to keep moving. We've got our options menu right here. The question mark will bring up the user manual. And next we have the actual effects. We've got BioVox, Vocoder, CompuVox, TalkBox, and PolyVox. Turn any one of them on. You just got to turn it on using the power button. And as you can see, as I'm turning them on, they're actually coming up here in this kind of visual mixer itself. And as I click and drag this node, you'll see that the level is actually changing on that particular module. And those are color coded, so it's orange and orange. That's a fun way to mix it. And it's really just super sleek looking. So each one of these has a further drop down for the advanced controls. You can see for BioVox, I've got the vowel controls. I can have up to 2 synthesizers, a noise oscillator, LFOs, and there's even a little filter over here. There's also going to be presets coming. I have a beta version of Vocal Synth 2, so I don't have any presets here, but there will be presets for each one of these modules. And just like the preset menu up here, you'd have a drop down here, and then you can cycle through them using the arrows. Here, the vocoder has kind of the same advanced features, although it just has the bands instead of the vowel controls. CompuVox, turn it on. Here we have the synth controls. TalkBox, open it up. Synth controls as well. And each one of those has parameters right up here, kind of basic parameters or the most used parameters that you can tweak out. And each one of these effects has a different effect on the vocal. And another thing, while we're talking about it, it doesn't have to be a vocal. If you have a synth or a bass, why not try it out? It's just going to do something crazy to it and you might get some really cool results. Here we have the pitch, and we can register high, mid, and low. We have the level amount, and we can correct the incoming audio. So the incoming vocal synth will correct the pitch, and we can go to key and then choose major, minor, chromatic, and then if we go to major, we can go right here. So if you don't want it to correct it, if you already have a pitch corrected vocal that's already ready to go, just leave it on chromatic and you'll be good to go. You can turn it off if you want as well. You got speed and strength. This is how fast and how much it corrects incorrect pitch of the vocals. This is the dry wet slider right here. We also have a gate control, panning left and right, and a width control. And then we have the output level right here. And by the way, to get anyone back to its starting point, you double click. And if you want to move any parameter slowly, you got to hold down Control and move up and down. You can see how slowly it's moving there. And down here, we've got some effects. We've got distortion, filter, transform, shred, chorus, delay, and ring mod. What's really cool about these is that you can adjust the signal path by moving them to the left and the right. So you can turn them on, turn them off, and maybe if you want to shred it up at the beginning and then add distortion, you can do it down there by turning that on and then having the distortion after. I'm not going to go too much into these effects because each one's going to be covered in their own video. And there's one other feature here, and it's the XY pad, where you can add any of these list of parameters to the X or the Y, chorus mix, for example, and the level. And you can see as I move up and down the Y here, the level of CompuVox moves, and as I move left and right, the chorus mix moves. And it's really cool if you're inside of Ableton Live because you can map this to the XY parameter here if you wanted to. So you can come in and do something like this. And now as I move it, it's going to move the same way inside of the synth. So if there's two parameters that you are always tweaking out, like maybe the dry wet and the delay or something, you can add this to the XY pad inside Ableton Live so you don't have to keep opening the synth every time you want to make a little change. The last thing I need to cover is the voicing, and this is going to be its own separate video as well. It's just good to know that it's right there, and we're going to talk about that in detail coming up soon. So that's a very general overview of the Vocal Synth. Let's move on to the next video. Okay, in this video we're going to talk about the meter and the XY pad inside of Vocal Synth. The meter is this graphic display here in the middle. Each one of these colored rings here indicates one of the vocal modules here at the top. So if I turn on BioVox, you'll see that it lights up and there's a really sleek animation. Now this is more than just being colorful. It also moves when you play audio through it, which is cool. But another really neat thing is you can adjust the levels for each one of the modules that are active by just using these drag and drops. So it's kind of like the visual mixer from Neutron 2. So let's go ahead and mix these up to see if we can't make something nice. Let's get revealing. Show me the moves you got, yeah. Don't leave me hanging. The music's banging. I'll show you mine, just watch, yeah. So that's what the meter is here in the middle. So it's more than just looking pretty, it's functionable as well. If you look at the meter down here, we can actually click over and there's another one called the XY screen. And this is like an XY pad, and you can see that I've got it linked up to the mix for the distortion and the chorus effect. Now, I've got X on the distort mix and Y on the chorus mix. Any one of these parameters you found inside of this dropdown can be applied to the XY pad. So this is just another creative way of mixing and getting balance between two separate things. Don't fight the feeling, let's get revealing. Show me the moves you got, yeah. Now another bonus tip is you can assign these to the XY pad inside of Ableton Live if you happen to have Ableton Live. If I come down here, I can actually choose the parameters, and Ableton Live has actually noticed that there's an XY pad inside of here, so it just gives me the two choices right here. And now as I move this, you'll see it moving inside of here. So anyway, that's a quick look at the meter and XY pad inside of Vocal Synth 2 and how and why you might use them. Let's move on to that next video. All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about the pitch correction. Pitch correction can be found over here. There's also voicing. We're going to talk about that in its own video. But this is the pitch correction here. And for the most part, by default, it's going to look like this. Let me go ahead and hit chromatic here. It's going to say correction is on. You can turn it off, turn it on. So let's just go ahead and listen to this vocal. Cool. What I want to do is just tweak this out. This vocal is at D minor. And let's say I know it's supposed to be in D minor, but I also know there are some issues with the vocal itself in terms of pitch. What I would do is begin to increase the level. I might go all the way up to 100 at first, come over and make sure correction is on, come down to minor and make sure it's on D, and then listen and see if it's being moved correctly. Don't fight the feeling, let's get revealing. Show me the moves you got, yeah. So that's perfect. Now, this pitch, high, mid, and low, for most of you and most times you're going to want to keep it on mid. But if you're getting some artifacts happening and it's not quite jazzing the way you want it to, by all means come in and switch up to high and low to see if they sound better. We'll come back to that in a second when I start tweaking this vocal. As far as key is concerned, if you don't know what key your vocal's in, if you got a sample pack off the web or something and it's not properly labeled, just leave it on chromatic and let Vocal Synth do the work for you. I knew what mine was, D minor, cool. Speed is how quickly Vocal Synth will move in correct notes. So if you got a D coming in but it needs to be E, it's going to determine how quick it moves that D to that E. Quicker is going to be more robotic, while slower is going to be more natural, but also it's going to be you're going to be able to hear the issues, you know what I mean? And strength is how much it moves it to where it needs to be. So look at 100, kind of like snapping to the piano roll. Lower values are going to be, again, more natural. So you're going to want to play with those, especially if you're working with something. But I'm just going to show you it in action by tweaking the correction. I'm going to say, let's go major, C, or let's go G major. Let's go speed 100, strength 100, and listen now. Don't fight the feeling. Let's get revealing. So you can hear that those notes are being moved so that it fits inside of G major. It doesn't sound great, but maybe we can try out these high and low and level parameters to see if we can make it sound a little bit better. Don't fight the feeling. Let's get revealing. Show me the moves you got. Yeah. Don't leave me hanging. The music's banging. I'll show you mine. Just watch. Yeah. So you can see what's happening there. It's actually pitching them a little bit differently using those other ones. It still doesn't sound great because we're trying to move it so far. I think for the most part, this pitch correction is going to be for singers at home that already know how to sing and can get pretty close, but just need a little bit of help to get right on the money. That's what I would use this for. I wouldn't use it for completely changing the pitch of a vocal sample like I'm doing here, going from D minor to G major. I would use the MIDI input mode up here at the top. I would use this MIDI mode, and I've showed you in other tutorials how to do that to switch up vocals completely. So that's just a quick look at the pitch module. Let's move on to the next video. All right, in this video, we're going to quickly go over the voicing tab here. The voicing tab is next to the pitch control. Jump in here, and there are two different sections in here. One is grayed out here at the bottom, and this is for the MIDI mode. And the one here at the top is for the auto mode. And what this is when audio is fed into Vocal Synth, it generates 3 voices from that. And this decides where those voices are gonna be in relation to the original frequency or note. So you can come in and choose it to be a 7th, a 5th, and you can see here by default we're going to have a sub octave, which just means 1 octave down, and a superior or super octave, which just means an octave up. We can also adjust the level, which is how much of this is fed into these modules for processing. Now if I jump into MIDI mode real quick, hit OK. Now we have mono and poly. Mono means only one note will happen at a time, so you can't play like chords. And poly allows you to play chords. We covered this briefly in a couple of videos in this series when we're using the MIDI mode. And then there's a glide feature, which will let your notes glide from one to the other if they're overlapping. Super helpful to know, especially these MIDI mode functions down here inside of the voicing tab. However, if you don't know what's going on and you really can't hear a difference, I suggest just leaving this alone. I don't really come in here that often unless I'm choosing between mono, poly, and glide. However, it's good to know that it's there and what it does. So anyway, that's a quick look at the voicing tab. Let's move on to the next video. All right, in this video, we're going to talk about the BioVox effect. This was inspired by articulatory synthesis. It offers tools for altering the physiological qualities of a vocal. The module estimates the vocal tract shape, and it allows you to effectively manipulate the vocal tract length and shape using just a few controls. So it's right here. It's the first one in the line of vocal effects. We turn it on, turn it off right here. And let's go ahead and play the vocal dry for a second. And I can barely see. So that's what it sounds like. And now if I turn it wet and just run clarity here on the BioVox, and again, we're going to go ahead and leave the level at 100%. And I can barely see. And clarity is going to be like how many points it has to work with. So if I turn this down, we can expect a glitchier, raspier sound. And I can barely see. So you can see there's like less sample points, it sounds like. Here is the shift level, which is how we can get a higher pitched tone or a lower pitched tone, and this is kind of the vocal tract length. And I can barely see where the light goes under. So we can get kind of those low pitched vocals or the higher pitched vocals. Nasally is going to kind of make you sound like you have a cold. And I can barely see. And breath is going to make you sound like you're having just more breath sounds added to your vocal.
And I can barely see while the light goes under, waiting for a wonder.
All right. And if we click right here, we get the advanced menu. You can see here that we can move it around and get the different vowel filters. We also have the ability to add a second oscillator. So right now we have one oscillator turned up all the way. It's the same pitch. And there we go, we're modulating it with this LFO. And we can also adjust the shape. So we're getting some really crazy effects there. Double click any of these parameters to put them back at their starting points. Pitch, you just got to click and drag up and down. You can go up an octave, a fifth, a seventh, and you also have your fine control right here. Now we can also add a second oscillator. Let's do that. We can't really hear a difference there because, well, they're the same octave. I'm going to double click this and put it back to where it was. And I'm going to actually click and drag down -12. This is a full octave down.
And I can barely see while the light goes under, waiting for a wonder.
So you can see here, now we're getting some really crazy effects. And if we wanted, we could go +12 here and then turn down the level.
And I can barely see.
In fact, not the level. Let's come out and turn the mix knob down, or the mix slider.
And I can barely see while the light goes under.
So now we have essentially backup vocals, one octave above and one octave below. And if we want to come into a noise generator, it's easy enough.
And I can barely see.
And we can control.
And I can barely see.
In fact, let me come out and put it 100% wet so we can get a better understanding.
And I can barely see while the light goes under, waiting for a wonder. And I can barely see.
And then over here we have a pan knob.
And I can barely see.
And a simple low pass, high pass filter.
And I can barely see while the light goes under.
So we can get some really cool effects just with that BioVox one. That was a quick look at it. Let's move on to the next video where we check out the vocoder effect. Okay, let's check out the vocoder effect now. I'm going to turn off BioVox just so we can focus on each one of these independently. And I'm also going to continue to use the same vocal so we get a really good understanding of exactly what it's doing to the sound. So this is kind of like your standard vocoder. Ableton Live has one. I'm sure the other DAWs have one as well. And what it's doing is just, usually what happens is you combine the vocal with the synth and it just makes it sound like a synth is talking. And that's exactly what we get right here. We have 3 different modes. We've got 3 different modes. We've got vintage, hard, and smooth. We also got a shift control. And you'll notice that this shift control is different than the shift control in the BioVox. The BioVox is more realistic and it's kind of trying to make it sound like a different singer is singing, while this shift control is just kind of really tweaking the sound, and it's definitely sounding synthesized. Scale adjusts how quickly vocoder adjusts itself to the incoming vowel sounds. So this one's more synthy and this one's more vocally. Cool. Let's go back to vintage. Actually, you know what? Smooth is good. Let's go ahead and look at the advanced tab. So here we have the bands, and there we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bands, and we can control the volume of each of the bands. So if we want it kind of to be higher towards the mid frequencies there and kind of roll off at the bottom and at the top, we do something like this. And if we want to adjust the panning of each of those, we can do that here as well. And this is on a per frequency basis. And just like before, we've got two oscillators. But before we do that, we just got to hit the redo button. So it's going to go ahead and put everything back the way it was. Cool. And once again, we've got two oscillators like I was saying, and we can do like we did before and turn the pitch down on one. We can change the oscillator type. We've got modulation control. And we also have noise control as well. And just like the other one, we've got our panning control and a low pass, high pass filter down here at the bottom. So that's a quick look at the vocoder module. Let's check out CompuVox in the next video. All right, so in this video, we're checking out the CompuVox effect. And this was based on some technology known as linear predictive coding. And as with a number of audio processors in the Vocal Synth, LPC, or the linear predictive coding, was originally for communications technology, which allowed you to encode intelligible speech at lower bit rates to save bandwidth. But because we don't have to worry about that anymore, we got cell phones cranking out beautiful speech, we can still use that technology to tweak out some vocals inside of our music productions, right? So let's go ahead. It's kind of like a bit crusher. You can almost look at it like that. Let's go ahead and listen to it.
And I can barely see.
Let's turn up those bits.
And I can barely see.
So at 100 is going to be less bits. So it's going to be more of an effect. I don't know if that makes any sense. Bytes.
And I can barely see.
Oh, that's actually super cool, right? So that's just pretty much picking out the vocal or the vowel sounds and running them like continuously, and it almost sounds like a lead synth. That's cool. So
And I can barely see. And I can barely see. What a light goes under.
cool. So the bats is obviously all about bats.
And I can barely see.
So what might be cool is if we do this,
And I can barely see.
but then blend it with the vocal.
And I can barely see. And I can barely see. And I can barely see.
So we're getting some cool effects there. It's kind of filling up the lower end. And if we wanted to come in, we could always roll off that super low end.
And I can barely see.
Very cool. Of course, we have the spell, which can go spell, math, or read.
And I can barely. And I can barely.
And let's jump back out and put it at 100% just so we can understand.
And I can barely see. And I can barely see. What a light. And I can barely see. And I can barely see. And I can barely see.
So spell is the most balanced LPC setting. Read is the strongest high order filter mode. And math is the broadest setting. And down here in the filters, it's just like the BioVox and vocoder. We've got up to 2 oscillators, a noise control. We've got our LFOs, a modulation sends, pitch control, and the filtering and panning systems. I'm not going to go over that again because we've already done it twice. It's the same thing as the BioVox and vocoder. If you missed those videos, go ahead and check them out if you really want to know more about this. But it's pretty straightforward. So that being said, let's move on to the next video, TalkBox. Okay, in this video, we're going to check out the TalkBox. Now, this is the effect that like Stevie Wonder and Peter Frampton use. When it sounds like their guitar is talking. It's a kind of like a vocoder, but it's doing different processes and sounds different in the end. So let's go ahead and run through it.
And I can barely see.
The drive increases the input gain to the talk box. Higher values will add a crunchy distortion, and additional harmonics generated when increasing the drive amount can help to enhance intelligibility by effectively adding frequency content. So let's try that out.
And I can barely see. And I can barely see.
So we're not really noticing it right now because we don't have any other effects applied. So the speaker adjusts the amount of the talkbox convolution applied to the signal. And this simulates the internal acoustics of a speaker compression driver that is typically sealed inside of the hardware talkbox pedal. So this is emulating a hardware unit, which is what the Peter Frampton would have used on stage.
And I can barely see where the light goes under.
So you can imagine if we had a guitar pumped into this, how that would sound. So the formant control will adjust the formant.
And I can barely see where the light goes under.
And then we have 3 different modes. We've got classic, dark, and bright. Classic is the most reminiscent of the classic talkbox. Bright offers an accentuated high end that helps maximize bits and articulation.
And I can barely see. And I can barely see.
And dark is obviously going to be more brooding and bassy.
And I can barely see.
And if we drop down here, just like all of the other ones, we have 2 oscillators and a noise oscillator as well, filter control, modulation sends. Again, I've already covered this. It's exactly the same as in the Biovox and vocoder units, which I ran through these in more detail. So definitely check that out. I'll just turn on the second oscillator just for fun right now. Let's go an octave above and see what that sounds like.
And I can barely see where the light goes under, waiting for a wonder.
So very, very cool stuff here. Let's check a square and change this to triangle.
And I can barely see.
So you're going to want to get in here and use these oscillators and use the different oscillator shapes and, maybe run that LFO for a little bit of tremolo and roll off the highs or the lows inside of any of these when you start getting in and actually making your patches and using this in real world situations. But that's a quick look at TalkBox. Next up, the all-new Polyvox module. All right, everybody, let's check out the Polyvox module, and it is absolutely a killer, especially when you use it in conjunction with some of the other modules. It's going to be a fairly short video because if you come into the effects here or the advanced tab, there isn't anything beyond the filtering system and that panning knob. So there aren't synth oscillators inside of here. All it's going to do is shift your vocal formants and kind of add vocal harmonies. So let's go ahead and check it out.
And I can barely see where the light goes under, waiting for a wonder. And I can barely see where the light goes under, waiting for a wonder. And I can barely see.
So the formant transposes the vocal formants of the signals it reproduces. You get the higher and the lower sounding, kind of like chipmunks and like super like low tones. Character controls the relationship between the incoming vocals formant envelopes and how they are applied to the outgoing sound. And the humanize feature varies time and pitch offset amount applied to the generated voices. This reduces phase cancellation and can increase realism slightly. So that's a quick look at the Polyvox module. Very straightforward, and again, I think it works best when used in conjunction with some of the other modules. It just kind of really brightens things up. You'll see what I mean when we do some of the real world case studies at the end of this tutorial series. But anyway, that's the final module. Let's move on to some of these effects at the bottom.